happened when close to 1 million passengers were directly affected. Why did the IndiGo chaos happen? Because of something called the FDTL rules. Now, it is clear now that all the airlines have united. They've all come together. Basically, IndiGo's come together with Air India, and they've now come together with SpiceJet, Akasa, everyone, because they want the government to permanently relax the FDTL norms. And Republic has the details. In fact, there is a chart that one of the points that airlines tried to make is to say that they did not have enough pilots. They tried to say they don't have enough manpower to enforce the FDTL rules. But take a look at this chart on your screen. Now, what this chart shows you is which airline has how many pilots versus the requirement of pilots and the surplus pilots on their rolls. And when you look at this, when you look at the entire chart, Air India has a surplus of 414 pilots, Air India Express surplus of 171 pilots, IndiGo surplus of 467 pilots, Akasa Air surplus of 367 pilots, SpiceJet has lesser pilots than required. But what it shows you is that they don't really have any shortage when it comes to pilots. When there are enough number of pilots, why are they going to the government and asking for FDTL rules to be relaxed? Now, what this confirms is, Shravan, this manufactured crisis that we saw during IndiGo is now coming a full circle. This is exactly what they wanted. They used the IndiGo chaos to go to the government and then say, hey, listen, we don't have pilots, or it's going to happen again. You've looked at the details, documents. Shravan, what does it confirm?
Well, in fact, let me try and explain why exactly have the airlines all come together demanding that the FDTL norms to be changed. The reason being is that it has a direct impact as far as operations are concerned, which would essentially mean that the pilots would be given more rest. The number of days basically goes up, which means that they will have to bring down on the number of flight operations that they essentially do. And that's exactly why you've had bigger airlines, particularly like IndiGo, having a problem with this entire issue. Of course, at that point in time, Air India wasn't really vocal about this. Akasa did not have much of a say in this entire matter. But the biggest, the impact was particularly with IndiGo, because you're looking at over 3,200 flight operations essentially getting directly impacted, because as per the roster, you would have had to perhaps improve the number of hours that you're giving to the pilots. In fact, the Pilot Association time and again have basically raised concerns about the fact that a single pilot is essentially asked to stretch beyond the norms, and that is the reason why the FDTL norms were basically tweaked. In fact, there was a court intervention following which you've had the airlines really stepping in and accepting those terms. Now, what's also important to highlight is that the aviation ministry, and particularly the regulatory body, is equally responsible for this, because the regulatory body has essentially accepted the time that has been given to them to make the necessary changes as far as the rosters are concerned.
Yeah, I want to show that table once again, because that sort of busts the lie. Let's go to that table once more. So it's not as if these airlines are short of pilots. They say they don't have enough pilots for the FDTL norms. Now, why are FDTL norms important? Flight duty time limitations govern how pilots work in shifts, get adequate rest, because pilots need to be rested. Some of the airlines are used to making pilots work overtime, and they don't like the fact that pilots are getting rest. Point number one. Point number two, this FDTL is being brought to mitigate fatigue in pilots and overhaul the safety mechanism in Indian aviation. It's going to ensure better air travel safety. But IndiGo has a problem. Let's go back to the numbers, please, because the story is in the numbers. And if you look at these numbers, it just busts that lie. each one of them, except for SpiceJet, has surplus pilots. Now, this is where the story stands. Wanted to get you these numbers and the details that we've picked up of a meeting. They've gone to the Civil Aviation Ministry and tried to meet the minister and arm twist. That's where the story stands. Republic tracking the story carefully and watching every update. Airlines hoping that we don't have our eyes on that development, but we do. Watching it closely. Thank you for joining us, Shawan. That's it on this edition of This Is Exclusive, ladies and gentlemen. Arnab coming up with two big debates. The big cricket debate is at 8 p.m. Why are we still talking about playing with Pakistan, entertaining Pakistan's tantrums? That debate at 8. And who really wins with the India-EU trade deal at 9 p.m. Stay tuned.